A top assassin, to hide his identity, would let himself get cut whenever someone deliberately swung a blade at him, even though he could easily dodge. Even his own mother scolded him as a weak, mediocre nobody. Bamboo that anyone else could chop down in one strike, he'd deliberately hack it 3 times. When he carried the bamboo home, he'd purposely act out of breath. When someone pushed him off a cliff on purpose, he landed on a tree branch. But to hide his martial arts skills, he deliberately snapped the branch and pretended to fall into the river below. But no one knew that this weakling was actually a top-tier assassin, trained since childhood by a killer organization. Sick of a life of killing, he decided to turn over a new leaf and become an ordinary person again. So he fled the assassin organization, went into hiding in a mountain village, and took up work as a papermaker. He married a beautiful wife and lived a quiet, peaceful life. But the good times didn't last. 2 bandits suddenly stormed into the village, shattering that peace. The shopkeeper swung a club to defend himself but was knocked down in an instant. A young worker stepped in to stop them and was also flattened with 1 blow. The assassin wanted to stay out of it and avoid getting dragged into the conflict. But when the bandits threatened to kill the shopkeeper's wife, he couldn't just stand by any longer. He rushed forward and subdued the 2 bandits in just a few moves. No matter how hard they struggled, they couldn't break free of his grip. The 2 bandits were completely stunned. The fighting skills they'd always been so proud of were utterly useless against him. One bandit drew his blade to help his boss, but in the chaos accidentally sliced off the boss's ear. Afraid his underling would only make things worse, the boss kicked him aside, then hurled Bond into the wall with such force that the shock even slammed the doors and windows shut. Bond crawled along the ground trying to escape. Wanting to prove himself, the underling lunged at the man to try to kill him, but ended up smashing his head into the corner of a wardrobe and dying on the spot. Enraged, the boss dragged Bond's body into the water and beat him savagely. Then, suddenly, the boss was struck by something. His body seized up and he collapsed into the water, dead. Since a death had occurred in the village, officials quickly sent someone to investigate. But when the medical examiner checked the body, no fatal wound could be found anywhere. Still, the bizarre nature of the death caught the attention of one officer. After investigating, he discovered that the dead boss was actually an extremely dangerous wanted criminal who had somehow died at the hands of an ordinary villager. So the officer went to the scene to look for clues and stumbled upon a rotten tooth knocked out of the bandit's mouth sitting in a wine jar. He also noticed that the bandit boss's eyes were bloodshot, clearly the result of a heavy blow to the temple. The temple controls the heartbeat, and once struck hard enough, the heart stops instantly. The officer then summoned Bond and asked him to demonstrate exactly what had happened that day. Although Bond tried to hide the truth, the officer still sensed something was off. His mind raced, and he pieced together that the bandits must not have been able to escape because Bond had used some kind of extraordinary martial art to subdue them. The boss's ear had been severed because Bond had used his internal energy to lift the boss's head up by about 2 centimeters. When Bond was sent flying into the wall to keep the villagers from seeing what was happening inside, he'd used his power to slam the doors and windows shut. Finally, he dragged the bandit boss into the water, using the water's resistance to weaken the force of his punches, before delivering one final fatal strike to his temple. The officer concluded that this man was no ordinary villager. So, what do you think is the best way to test whether someone is secretly a killer? Follow me for more highlights from the movie.